So, oh wow, we're live.
Totally.
How are you, Jolene?
Oh my gosh, that's such a loaded question. In this moment, I'm focused on this right here.
I'm here for it. I am
That's
so
good.
here for it. It's been quite the interesting day, so to speak, don't you think?
There's been a lot going on.
Yes, no?
Yeah.
Maybe a little bit of a rally of 1%. The hounds got released.
Yeah, there was definitely some bright spots. I mean, considering the world is on fire, but yeah.
Okay. Well, today is going to be very, very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
But are you ready for it?
I'm ready.
Okay. All right. Yo, what's good, everybody? I am Mark Monroe, accompanied by my wonderful co-host, co-producer, as well as good friend, the
Jolene GC, and the place to be. What's up, y'all?
And this is Trade Talk Tuesday, but with a little bit of a twist here, because if you notice, we're actually going through some series of talking about DNA, data now analyzed. And so that's where we get to look at the research and give it a little bit more of a fine-tooth comb. And on top of that, be able to do deep dives so that way you can actually see how it corresponds and correlates to the things that are within your portfolio. So sit back, relax, get your notes, your pen and pad, or your iPad Pros and pencils, or Samsungs if that's your flavor. And then on top of that, go ahead and hit that subscribe button down below, because if you are part of the Come Up Cousins, then you know what this is. You know the vibes. You know how we roll. But if you're not a part of it and you want to join it, it's just as simple. Just click that subscribe button down below, and you're good to go. Welcome to the family. Hey cousin. Hey auntie. Hey uncle. Anyways. And then on top of that, if you want to be in the know for when we release a video, which we're actually getting ready to find out who was the first one for today's episode, and I'm going to see if Jolene gets it without looking at it.
I haven't looked.
Okay, I'm just going to tell you this. It's going to surprise you. Okay. All right. So while that's happening, go ahead and hit the bell so that way you can be a part of the notification squad, aka the Cool Kids Club. And on top of that, if you like what we do, go ahead and hit the like button, because I guess apparently it gets out to other folks who are not already subscribed and not already in the know. So, but if you think that there's room for improvement, then you know the other button that you can press. But just let us know why. Mm-hmm. So, who do you think it was?
It's somebody.
You looked.
I swear I didn't look. I did not look. All I did was I wrote a comment. I said, "Hey y'all," but I didn't scroll to the very top.
Okay.
I don't know. If it's not the two, I don't know.
Well, shout outs to you, Michael Key Jr. You were the first person here in the live chat. So what's good?
Hey, Michael Key.
Congratulations. Reggie, I'm sorry you were second. And Vic, he was just, I don't know what happened to Vic. I think that, something happened. We need to send out an APB for Vic this week and find out what's going on. If you're in the chat, Vic, just go ahead and say hello. All right, Jolene.
Are we ready?
You know the vibes. I'm sitting here. You know how excited I am? I'm sitting here in a Truth Wins Out t-shirt by ARC, and it's wrinkled.
Okay. All right. Well, there you have it. About that. All right, here we go. What's up, y'all? Straight Talk Tuesday. My name is Jolene GC, and the place to be, and let's get into this market. So overall, the Dow was down negative 68.13 points. The NASDAQ was up 13.65 points, I believe, if I can read my own handwriting, or maybe that was 60 points. And the NASDAQ came in strong, y'all. 146.10. The VIX is down to now 16.65, and the U.S. Treasury note is remaining level at 1.67. Now, for sector performance, as you know, there are 11 sectors. We track the top 3 and the bottom 3. The top 3, utilities, consumer discretionary, and tech. I don't know why utilities is up there, but
I can tell you why.
It's up there. Okay, well, tell us why.
So we had the consumer price index that was reported earlier today, and we saw it rise. So I think it was about 0.6%, though that we were expecting 0.2%. And the major thing that really represented that entire spike 90% of that was due to pretty much utility-based things like energy and oil and gas.
Okay, that makes sense. That makes sense. Yeah, and I saw some people today on Twitter trying to blame Joe Biden for gas prices, but I mean, there was no policy he did to make that happen. So whatever. Anyway, okay, so now for the bottom three for sector performance, we have industrials, consumer staples, and financials. And we have earnings week for financials. So that'll be interesting to see how JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs are doing.
Yeah.
AKA you and Zay, pretty much.
Zay already knows what this is. Like, the game has already been won. So, I mean, either way, I don't really care about financials, but in this, I'll sit back for this one. I think that they'll do well. I mean, for over the quarter, and I think they both got into cryptocurrency, but I think that they'll do just fine. Their trading desks, have made them profitable because clearly banks aren't collecting any interest since interest rates are still low. So God bless.
Shout out to T-Will. All right. So we got pick performance. As you know, or maybe you don't know, if you're new, you might not know that you can find the Come Up Series picks by going to our Instagram page at that Come Up Series. Scroll through and find the post that has all of our picks. There's about 37 of them. And all was right in the world. This was a bright spot today as Tesla, AKA my scale bae, was here. It was here today doing its thing. And also, while it's doing its thing, is also responsible for lifting up that S&P 500. Okay, so let's shout it out to Tesla. Okay, then we got CRISPR and DocuSign coming in at top three, and then the bottom three: JP Morgan, TBT, and Nike were the bottoms. But you know what? We did have some 52-week highs. Shout out to NVIDIA. Finally. Shout out to NVIDIA. We got NVIDIA, we got FTNT, like per usual. Microsoft was third best performer today as far as S&P 500 goes. And then we have XPO. Shout out to Q.
XPO Logistics. They're in here.
Yes. So that was
pretty. How many 52-week? We had a lot of 52-week highs though today though.
Four. There's four of them.
Have we been talking? Did FTNT go 52-week high again?
Yep. NVIDIA, FTNT, Microsoft, and XPO.
It would be very interesting for folks if you we gave you quite the gift on the Come Up pick list, and I think that nobody really talked about it. FTNT, go back and look at it from February 16th to today.
Do that. Some of y'all might get your feelings hurt. I don't know. But it's been, I swear, every time we do the 52-week highs, FTNT is on there. I mean, it's holding strong. But given what's going on in the world today, y'all, we're gonna have a moment for some history thanks to Brian Clyett, our historian.
Professor.
Yes, chancellor. We call him all kinds of names.
Chancellor.
All right. So let me see. Hold on. Yeah, let's just get into it. All right, so this is the letter from Birmingham City Jail. These are excerpts from the letter that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. wrote, while he was in jail. Yep. So from the jail where he was imprisoned as a participant in nonviolent demonstrations against segregation, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. wrote in longhand the letter which follows. It was his response to a public statement of concern and caution issued by 8 white religious leaders of the South. The letter from Birmingham Jail, also known as the letter from Birmingham City Jail, and The Negro is Your Brother. It's an open letter written on April 16th, 1963 by Martin Luther King Jr. It says that people have a moral responsibility to break unjust laws and to take direct action rather than waiting potentially forever for justice to come through the courts. Responding to being referred to as an outsider, King writes the following: injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. My dear fellow clergymen, while confined here in the Birmingham City Jail, I came across your recent statement calling our present activities, quote unquote, unwise and untimely. Seldom, if ever, do I pause to answer criticism of my work and ideas. But since I feel that you are men of genuine goodwill and your criticisms are sincerely set forth, I would like to answer your statement in what I hope will be a patient in what I hope will be patient and reasonable terms. I think I should give the reason for my being in Birmingham, since you have been influenced by the argument of outsiders coming in. I have the honor of serving as president of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, an organization operating in every Southern state with headquarters in Atlanta, Georgia. We readily consented. In any nonviolent campaign, there are 4 basic steps. Step 1, collection of the facts to determine whether injustices are alive. 2, negotiation. 3, self-purification. And 4, direct action. We have gone through all of these steps in Birmingham. Birmingham is probably the most thoroughly segregated city in the United States. Its ugly record of police brutality is known in every section of the country. Its unjust treatment of Negroes in the courts is a notorious reality. There have been more unsolved bombings of Negro homes and churches in Birmingham than in any city in this nation. These are the hard, brutal, and unbelievable facts. On the basis of these conditions, Negro leaders sought to negotiate with the city fathers. But the political leaders consistently refused to engage in good faith negotiation. I must make 2 honest confessions to you, my Christian and Jewish brothers. First, I must confess that over the last few years, I have been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in the stride toward freedom is not the white citizens counselor or the Ku Klux Klaner, but the white moderate who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, I agree with you in the goal you seek, but I can't agree with you with your methods of direct action, who paternalistically feels that he can set the timetable for another man's freedom, who lives by the myth of time, and who constantly advises the Negro to wait until a more convenient season. Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. Lukewarm acceptance is much more bewildering than outright rejection. One day the South will know that when these disinherited children of God sat down at lunch counters, they were in reality standing up for the best in the American dream and the most sacred values in our Judeo-Christian heritage. Never before have I written a letter this long, or should I say a book. 6 pages typed. I'm afraid that it is much too long to take your precious time. I can assure you that it would have been much shorter if I had been writing from a comfortable desk. But what else is there to do when you are alone for days in the dull monotony of a narrow jail cell other than write long letters, think strange thoughts, and pray long prayers? If I have said anything in this letter that is an understatement of the truth and is indicative of an unreasonable impatience, I beg you to forgive me. If I had said anything in this letter that is an overstatement of the truth and is indicative of my having a patience that makes me patient with anything less than brotherhood, I beg God to forgive me. Yours for the cause of peace and brotherhood, Martin Luther King Jr.
Powerful.
Pertinent for today.
Indeed.
All right.
So, you ready?
Yeah.
Okay. So, a while back, I did an episode kind of like giving a brief little example, where I did a brief deep dive into ARK Invest Big Ideas. And we were talking about deep learning, and I think we also kind of like stumbled into a few other things like maybe electric vehicles. But I felt like I didn't do it as big of justice by going into something else, which is something that's very much so pertinent, very much so where we're moving into the future. And that's really the reinvention of data centers. And so today I'm going to run through that, but then I'm also going to do something and continuing on with our tech vision from Accenture's presentation. And I'm going to see if I can marry the two together by giving you some data from one side and then also giving you data from the other side, and then showing you exactly how they correlate, and then helping you get an idea of what does the current landscape of the market look like, and then where is it that we're going. So that's a great big undertaking that I'm going to try to do within this amount of time. So I think I got 45 minutes of greatness. So hopefully I don't get anybody lost in the sauce. Jolene, feel free to keep me honest and hold me accountable to make sure that no cousin is left behind. So are we ready to go? We ready to rock?
Yeah, we're ready.
Okay, so
Oh, we lost Mark, y'all. We lost him. Okay, so he definitely will be back. There right now, what's happening is this is something that he said might happen. This happened last time. His internet decided to do an update in the middle of the presentation, and he has the presentation on his side, and I don't have access to it. So what we're going to do for right now is he will be on probably in like I say 60 or so seconds. Um, Let me just prepare you for what's going to happen. So, as you heard Mark talking about the digital,
Okay,
oh, he's back. He's back.
here
I
we
was
go.
give the background on what you were going to go into today.
I know, right? All right, so let's go. We're going to talk about, and this is kind of weird because we keep doing the same thing. This is the second time that I've actually been like memed out. So here we go.
Someone
Let's,
said that's right.
all right, so let's first talk about the reinvention of the data center. Let's roll the clock back a little bit. Back in the day when we first started off with networks and everything else, we didn't actually have like, significant data centers. We were actually running like server farms, like where it's just like there was computers everywhere, hot box rooms and everything else where there was a computer and it was able to control XYZ. Now, of course, we've gotten to the point where we have the amount of server farms that literally control a lot of the data across multiple different companies, systems, governments, and essentially they're controlled within pretty much server farms as well as like racks and racks and racks of just machine powered or computing power. And we've changed over time. So when we look at it, you can kind of look at data centers as the new modern day power plants. Just think about the amount of power that typically runs through your natural data center. It's like, if you really think about it, if you actually want to see where your data centers are, the best way to do it is look at a heat map from, say, for example, satellite view around the world, and you'll actually be able to see where some of those data centers sit. It's kind of interesting, though, that they do their best to try to keep them cool, but you can only do so much. All right, so looking at this further, cheaper, faster, and more efficient processors are starting to displace Intel, which traditionally had captured over 90% of all processor revenue. We're going to get into that in a little bit. So to put it into perspective, Intel literally had the entire market when we knew as servers, enterprise, completely unlocked. Nobody ever dared to step into Intel space. Mm-hmm. And then when we think about cloud computing, they believe that ARM, as well as RISC-V and graphics processing units, are likely to emerge as the new powerhouse processors. Together, they could scale at 45% annual rate to 19 billion in revenue by 2030. I think that this is somewhat of a misstatement, because I think that this is going to grow a lot heavier, especially where we are in technology today, which, if you think about it, there is a few acquisitions that are up for the table, one being a Xilinx acquisition and another one actually being within the actual acronym itself, ARM, which is by NVIDIA. And both of those are actually up on the acquisition block. And I think they're both at about $30 billion in acquisition, just to put it into perspective. So let's go a little bit further. So they say new architectures reinvent the data center every few decades, which is true. Once upon a time, we used to have these things called x86 processors, aka 32-bit processing. So this was like around the time of Windows 95, Windows 98, Windows Me, if you were unfortunate, and Windows 2000. That was pretty much during the time of 32-bit processing. Now, what that means is that essentially that there wasn't that much. It wasn't that powerful of a processor, but during that time, it was very powerful, but it wasn't able to handle significant amounts of computational data. So if we think about it, today, ARM processors are leveraging the scale of mobile ecosystems to disrupt Intel. So if you think about it, if Intel, the chip company that made CPU processors that power, like it's pretty much the brain of every computer, you've heard that a CPU is a brain. So pretty much you cannot run any computer without a brain. So if you ever look at any of my rigs, or if you look at any computer, it cannot run without a CPU processor, a central processing unit. And so essentially what we're at right now is we're pretty much at an influx, because once upon a time we had legacy power, Spark, But then we went into x86, which took up most of the market. And then, of course, we started moving for, if you notice, legacy started to die out. And then now x86 is starting to be removed. And then we have this new thing called ARM, which is ultimately pretty much a new technology that uses a 64-bit processing. So it's double exactly what x86 can do. And it's more power efficient. And then on top of that, that's just been the new widely advanced standard that we've accepted. So they believe that the combination of ARM will move and RISC-V will move from 0% market share in 2020 to 71% of the server market. Now, why does this matter? Because now we're getting to a place where people want their data much faster. They want it more efficiently, and they don't want any hiccups in the process. So if you think about it, here are some of the processors that currently use ARM as we know it. If you look at anything within the Internet of Things, they use ARM processors. If you look at most of your Android devices or tablets, they use some type of ARM process. If you look at even Apple iPhones, they're using some type of ARM process, though that it's not really ARM, but it's essentially their own SoC, custom-based silicon, but it's still on the ARM framework infrastructure. It's just that it's their own proprietary. So essentially what you're starting to see is Intel made one huge mistake. And that one huge mistake that they made was not going mobile. And when they decided to go mobile, it was too little too late. Because then you have, like, if you think about it, one of the biggest processors out there that uses the ARM technology that is also out there just dominating within the space so far is Qualcomm. If you think about it, almost every single US-based device that's sold in America that's non-Apple iPhone is built upon Qualcomm technology. Even if you're looking at, say, for example, what's coming out in some of those ultra-thin notebooks or those Chromebooks, that's Qualcomm technology as well. It's their processors. And you're starting to see it happen all across the board as well. So now we see that these things are widely efficient. They produce so much productivity and efficiency and power and speed. Now it's just a matter of like, okay, hey, well, if we're able to do this in a small form factor and then keep our costs low, then why not go somewhere else in which that we can use this infrastructure and start disrupting other places? So we went from mobile phones to then laptops, and then now it makes sense to say, okay, hey, let's put it at a massive scale, and let's bring that into data centers and server farms. And if you think about it, a lot of folks say that it's really the consumer market that runs things. No, the consumer market is very, very heavy, but then at the same token, something must back it. And what is that one thing that must back it? It's called enterprise. Yep, you guessed it. So when we think about the AMDs of the world, or when we think about the NVIDIAs of the world, they're making a vast portion of their revenues right now because of the fact that, think about auto industry, that's enterprise. When we think about server and cloud infrastructure, that's definitely enterprise. When we think about so many other spaces across the board that are built upon large companies that are ultimately buying those products, that's enterprise. So then let's go into this part. They say that Intel seems frozen in time. Now, we kind of know the story because you guys have seen me throw so much shade at Intel for good reason, because of the fact that me being a technological enthusiast, I say, okay, hey, I want the best, and I want the consumers to also have the best, and they deserve the best. But Intel, they kind of got cocky a little bit. They got very, very cocky. So it kind of lets you know, like, this whole nanometer conversation that we've been talking about with Intel and why is it that they're not able to keep up? Mm-hmm. Well, here's the lineage and timeline of the manufacturing from Intel, because mind you, they have their own foundry, and which means that they create their own chips. So to put this into perspective, AMD, NVIDIA, they have to go to other foundries and do business with them, like, for example, a la a TSM, in order to have that same type of technology built, except Intel can do it right there in-house. And here's the problem. When you're that big of a giant, you start getting what we call complacent. And over time, things are supposed to get more and more efficient. Look up Moore's Law, do some research there. But essentially, it started coming down from 180 nanometer all the way down to 14. But then we stopped, 14. We had 3 different cycles. We had almost a decade of the same nanometer process. And why? Because Intel had no competition. If I was to draw a timeline of this, looking at the process for Intel, and then also drawing the timeline of AMD's downfall, almost leading towards its bankruptcy, you will start to see that at the same time that AMD was on the downfall and that Intel should have been innovating, essentially Intel's innovation looked a lot like AMD, the company's stock price. And then thus AMD came out in 2014, changed the entire model, changed the game. And thus Intel was like, we're not ready for that. But then now it's like all of a sudden they feel the competition. Now they're a little too late. So when we look at it, they, like we said, they delayed its 10 nanometer process for 4 years, allowing its competitors TSM and AMD to lead the market in 2020. And that's exactly what happened. So as of now, we still don't have as of now, currently, I think we do have a 10 nanometer process, but it's not up to snuff. It's not up to standard based upon where Intel should be, where we know them for their performance. Instead, it's kind of like lackluster.
Mm-hmm.
So ARM could power the majority of developer PCs by 2030. And that's true. Because when we look at most of your Apple MacBooks, they're using some type of ARM framework. And then essentially, as you can see, we're moving out of this x86. And by 2025, they say that essentially that we should be at pretty much over half is going to be ARM. And then by 2030, it'll definitely be significantly ARM. And to this, I 100% agree. Why? If you think about it again, the price margins or the cost margins are low, which ultimately will increase your profit margins based upon what you sell. So that's advantage companies. Why would they not buy into it? The technology itself, as it pertains to its creation, is cheaper. Of course, we may be in this chip shortage right now, but yet at the same token, let's ask this for perspective. If you think about all the chips today that are ultimately being created and this chip shortage that we're experiencing across the board, ask yourself this: are they x86 chips or are they ARM chips? Don't worry, it's a spoiler. It's ARM. So if we look at the same time, Microsoft is doubling down on its efforts to support Windows on ARM processors. That's a fact. We saw it originally with Windows Surface RT, though that the tablet or the device itself was crap. But yet at the same token, it's essentially just letting you know that they took a gamble and said, okay, hey, well, we're going to try this technology, though that we're on the very beginning. Now, it wasn't a great product, but yet at the same token, it let us know exactly what is it that ARM could do as it pertains to performance. And we were just at the beginning stages. I think that was around 2012, 2014. Okay, so then let's look at, say, for example, ARM could become the new standard in the cloud, because we're talking about that, right? And look at the cost as it pertains to the cost per hour, and look at the performance per hour, and just the overall performance. It just completely dominates what the existing platforms give you. And that's Intel Xeon processors for AWS Cloud versus, say, for example, ARM. It's just letting you know exactly where the efficiency lies. So how does this all play into perspective? So when we say that they could be the new standards, right? And you have to look at it like this. Think about the AI processing power and which that we can do with ARM versus going with legacy technology. We've moved beyond it. I mean, the technology itself has just gotten so obsolete that honestly, think about even the refrigerators or the appliances and everything else. That's all going to be 100% ARM. So by 2030, the accelerator should replace the CPU as the main server compute. So this is where it gets interesting, because for anybody that's been watching NVIDIA's GTC event, this is where it really starts to play out, because now it's kind of interesting because, Kathy, I hope you're sitting back at home sipping your water, because honestly, it's like, you and your team, here's to you. Cheers. Congratulations, because you were 100% spot on. Accelerators such as GPUs and tensor processing units, all this fancy smanchy, language, perform the most demanding computing tasks, including artificial intelligence, analytics, drug discovery, and cloud gaming. Sounds familiar, right? From what we were hearing from, say, for example, NVIDIA's event. And I'm probably sure we'll hear some of that same type of conversation that takes place within AMD's event. I mean, it's just so interesting, right? Because think about it. Every single GPU is a supercomputer within its own right. Like literally, legit, a supercomputer. So if we're putting that into perspective, then that's letting you know that essentially that every GPU has an AI chip built into it. And they're only just doing more and more and more. So if that's the case, we're getting to a point where probably we won't even need CPUs, because ultimately GPUs, they'll take the same technology from the GPUs, the graphics cards that they create. They'll take that same technology and build a brand new next generation CPUs that will ultimately power everything. But and this is just, of course, my assumption. So today is April 13th, 2021 at 6:31 p.m. Pacific time. Mark Monroe says this, and alongside with Joe Lynn, here's one where you can book it. Do not be surprised if you start getting GPUs and CPUs combined all as one device, and they start to become more so the norm. So really where you're going to start seeing where it's something where it's a graphics card and on top of that CPU chip all in one embedded.
Yeah, that's going to be fire.
And imagine having that on the cloud. You're already starting to see part of it, right? Like, one of the interesting things that we also saw within NVIDIA's event, which I don't think a lot of folks caught during that event, but think about all their deep learning, their deep learning products that they're selling, right? Since they don't have any CPU chips, they could have easily gone with Intel. But unfortunately, they didn't.
They're like, no thanks.
Instead, they chose, that's right, AMD. They chose Lisa Su and team to literally power the CPU. And ultimately, if you go back and watch, I think Jensen's keynote from last year, where he was talking about RTX 30 series and going through that technology, where pretty much where they can start taking a lot more of those tasks built upon the software, where those tasks literally start to get powered by the graphics card versus being powered by, say, for example, the CPU. Imagine what that does, because now you just brought so much computing power at the fingertips of every single person out there. And imagine what that does for, say, for example, your laptops. Imagine what that does for the cloud. It's kind of interesting. And just as a little bit of homework for everybody, you may want to go look up what was NVIDIA has actually created a CPU chip before. They actually have. A lot of folks only look for NVIDIA for its graphics and AI technology. But if you really think about it, NVIDIA has actually created a CPU chip of their own. And it's actually used in devices today. So you may want to go check that out.
Homework alert.
So they believe that the server processors will transform in the next decade. So they say pretty much, we believe accelerators dominated by graphics cards will become the dominant processor in the data center, growing 21% at an annual rate to $41 billion. And I believe that that's 100% true. And the reason why I believe that is because, again, look at the cost. You start to see that the cost itself starts to come down. And then at the same token, it's like, because now you don't have to have two different pieces of technology. You can have them all embedded within one, because the GPU is a supercomputer within itself. You no longer need the CPU. So then ultimately now you have the acceleration, and that's going to be built upon the ARM technology. Hence there's a reason why NVIDIA has highly targeted ARM as its acquisition. It makes all the sense in the world. And I'll leave that there as it pertains to, say, for example, what we know of on the reinvention of the data center, because I felt like it was very pertinent, and hence the reason why a lot of folks are kind of spooked at Intel by saying, okay, hey, now we already have this competition from AMD in which that we can't keep up on the consumer side, and now they've stepped into our space on the data center side as well as cloud. But then now we also have NVIDIA, which is now starting to throw their hat into play, and they're really known as it pertains to artificial intelligence chips, as well as alongside with this acquisition deal of ARM. How will Intel be able to compete? What we could possibly be seeing is a giant getting ready to fall. And it could possibly end very, very ugly for Intel.
Now, Mark.
Yes.
Okay, so on the first, your screen is glitching, by the way.
Yeah.
Just give you
that. The matrix over here.
That heads up. Okay, so on the first DNA episode, Data Now Analyst Part 1, we were talking about the stack technology stack strategies.
Yep.
So at what point do you think NVIDIA, or not NVIDIA, but Intel, like failed to consider how important that technology increase would be.
I think around the time that when they realized that AMD started struggling, the company AMD started significantly struggling, and they realized, okay, hey, we don't really have any significant competition. So now, since we don't have the competition, we're more so considered a stealth monopoly. And when you become a stealth monopoly, you get to really control the market, because at that point in time, nobody can really compete with you. And I think it was around that time of really 2012, 2010, where you started to see that Intel itself just really just stopped innovating. They just legit stopped. But meanwhile, it's like you had other companies working, like, for example, AMD, as well as with NVIDIA and other manufacturers, like, for example, TSM. They started improving the process. But mind you, you have Intel, which is the juggernaut. And they, for a long period of time, they dictated what the market said. They literally were the market. So what Intel said went. But then AMD changed leadership. And on top of that, they reshaped their focus. And when you're that big, here's the thing about being a small company versus a big company. And especially when you don't run it like today's companies of what we see, like your Amazons and, you know, your Teslas and those, where they run them like independent startups within, like, every division within the company is run like a startup. Intel doesn't do that. It's very much so a classic company where it's very much so bureaucratic. And hence the reason why it's like, think about it. They weren't driven by innovation at that point anymore. The people in whom which that they once had there at Intel for leadership that were very much so focused on that division was no longer there. So then another part to that is we're looking at, say, for example, you know, the folks in whom which that they have as CEO. Like, they just recently had a CEO leave and then bring somebody in who represented the industry, because now they realize, like, hey, you can't be innovative if you don't have innovation from the head.
That's
Hence
right.
the reason why I'm probably sure that people have seen that thing from Tim Cook where he says that sooner or later he's going to step down from CEO and chairman at Apple, where essentially he passes on the torch to somebody else. Steve Ballmer at Microsoft, it didn't really work out. Then they had to bring in somebody else who represented the technology, and look at where Microsoft has gone. Satya Nadella has done a fantastic job. I mean, the reason why Google has consistently been able to flourish, more so I think that it's kind of like a research company, but yeah, at the same token, it's still a company. Mm-hmm. But think about it. You went from Larry Page and Sergey Brin. Then you had Eric Schmidt, who was a great CEO, but understood that, okay, hey, there's certain things that I don't know. Let me focus on the tech. And then they brought in Sundar Pichai. So it's like, when you look at it, if you look at Jensen Huang, computer science. If you go look at his LinkedIn, it says computer science. If you look at Lisa Su, it says computer science. Very much so focused on the technology and the innovation. So with that, when you see companies that don't have that leadership at the head of their forefront, but mostly people, and no shade towards anybody who has an MBA or anything like that, no shade, none whatsoever. But when you're dealing in markets where you're talking about innovation, it's going to be very, very tough to have somebody there at the head who doesn't understand. And ultimately, that's what causes things to really start to fall apart. Because essentially, when you find yourself in a knife fight with another company that's really focused towards innovation and you can't keep up, that's deadly. So
okay, so we have Intel as a sleeper, right, for their lack of innovating. Who else right now would you say is a sleeper?
Well, I wouldn't even say Intel's a sleeper. I would say
like
that
sleep at the wheel, like they're not innovating, not like that. But I mean, like, they're just, you know, on the brink of innovative past.
Innovative past. I will say this. I mean, to a certain degree, we have to also, you know, we have to give somewhat of Apple a little bit of the side eye. Though that they make iterations, but yet at the same token, Apple used to be the driving force of innovation. And at one point in time, I think that the competition between them and Samsung really spurred a lot of innovation. I would say that honestly, I would also look at, you know, your legacy companies that chose not to innovate. So look at a lot of your auto manufacturers that are now scrambling to get their fleets out by 2030 or 2023. Look at Mercedes, where it's like they join, like for anybody that hasn't been paying attention, Mercedes has recently talked about an EQS model that's getting ready to come out that I think they're going to talk about on Thursday or release the details about it. But it's like, okay, hey, it doesn't come out until I think 2022 or 2023. And then at the same token, we don't know what the price points are. And then at the same token, it's just like, all right, well, they're making a lot of bold claims within this technology, but yet at the same token, you've got an entire company that's been there on the full fledged. And it's like, and it's no knock towards like some of these companies. Sometimes they can only just work with the best of what they've got. But when we look at companies like Intel, where it's like you literally had the game, all you had to do is just keep going, keep pushing yourself. But when you lost that love for and drive for innovation, that kind of changes things.
Okay, so you said that I think you did a great job of like laying out, what's going on with the data centers and like the just the layout of that type of innovation. Now, when it comes to this part two, I want to get into that.
Shout out to all the twins in the world.
Yes.
Shout out to you, Aaron. Shout out to you. All right, so it's okay. So let's talk about it. The mirror world, right? The power of massive, intelligent digital twins. This is very huge. I mean, because when we think about it, we're about to, I think that this is probably about to be something very, very interesting. So when we think about digital twins, right? Like, one, what is that technology? Now, a lot of it goes back to like the early days of NASA, where they had significant amounts of information where they were able to process, to compute, and then essentially come forth with something that would go into the real world. But now we've kind of like flipped that model where it's like, if we think about it, digital twins are virtual replicas of physical devices that data scientists and IT pros can use to run simulations before actual devices are built and deployed. So just think about it. You already know about, like, for example, everything in which that your product will do in the real world long before, say, for example, it's there. So if you think about it, in the best case scenario that I can give you is, think about an Iron Man where essentially, Tony Stark had Jarvis, and Jarvis kept running all those simulations to create the better suit or the Iron Man suit.
Okay.
That was pretty much the digital twin.
Okay, so for the note takers, because that was a lot, basically a digital twin is a virtual replica of a physical system, product, or process.
Correct.
That's the overarching. Then you can add some more layers to that, but that's the...
Yeah. So when we think about digital twin technology, it has moved beyond manufacturing and into merging worlds of Internet of Things and artificial intelligence and data analytics. That's really the kind of like the driver there. So if you think of a digital twin, right? Like, so for example, how is it created? So a digital twin design is made by gathering the data, creating computational, models. So you do data models. And this can include an interface between a digital model and an actual physical object to send and receive feedback and data in real time. Now, what does that sound like? We'll get to that. Let that sit on your mind for a second. So, of course, we talk about it where we're talking about Apollo 13, where they were able to like figure it out and then ultimately bring them back home. They used a lot of the digital twin, what we didn't know back at the time, but what we know now of. That was like the earliest where we could trace back to digital twin technology. But here's the thing, though. If you think about like the things in which that is starting to take place today, like when we talk about organizations scaling up or experimenting with this year, look at 5G. So on the left side, we have scaling, and then on the other side, we have experimenting. But notice how the experimentation is driving the scale, and then ultimately the scale is built upon, say, for the example, the things in which that were once experimented. So it's very obvious that if you see low experimentation, you probably see scale. Because remember, at one point in time, we saw artificial intelligence and cloud infrastructure significantly higher on the experimentation process. But now that the experimentation is over and now going into the real world, now you're starting to see cloud infrastructure and artificial intelligence at scale. Now, the thing is, we're now at the part where we see some companies out there scaling their digital twin technology. And then we also see a lot of companies start to increase their, say, for example, their experimentation. So when we mean by experimenting, we're pretty much saying applying technology to test within process, either A/B testing, so two different scenarios and seeing which one sticks, but not yet change the process in a full production system yet. Now, scaling means you're applying the technology to change a process or multiple processes in a full production system. I hope people understand where I'm going with this.
I think they do.
So they did a survey and asking, for example, 65%, and they found out that 65% of executives expect their organization's investment in intelligent digital twins to increase over the next 3 years. Now, here's an interesting thing, which is very, very interesting. Now, if you look at Microsoft, and I think I talked about this a while back, where I said, don't be surprised if you start seeing that Microsoft uses its AI technology, uses its technology from its cloud, and uses the AI to be able to run the data and learn about the users in real time, and then literally build services on top of that from what it learns. And thus, here we are today. Well, look at the things in which that Microsoft is starting to produce. Look at what it's acquiring. Look at where it's going. And look at the technologies in which that they're using as it pertains to leverage. Hence the reason why that nuanced merger acquisition deal makes sense, because now they see that from the data, hey, we need to acquire this or either build this, and we're not going to spend that much amount of money to spend over years and time to create something that already exists. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to acquire this technology, implement the technology, and then start providing this as a service on top of a la carte to the services that we already provide via AKA the Microsoft Project Cloud, or say, for example, Azure or 365. You see how that all starts to make sense? See,
Yeah,
where we talked about stacking strategically, and now we're talking about the digital twin. You're using the digital twin from artificial intelligence now to literally be your guide at the same time. So what they're saying is the company strategy uses data streaming from connected machines to track conditions within the factories, then adds machine learning and AI techniques to test potential operational changes and improve production efficiency and flexibility.
Wait, Mark.
Yes.
We got to reel you back in for a moment. Okay, so I see that the cousins are asking for real world examples. Can you talk about the data twin and how Tesla owners
yes,
have data twin or digital twins?
Sure, I can definitely do that. So when we look at Tesla, right? Every Tesla that's out there on the road, like Tesla already knew exactly how was it going to work. Before they released it onto the road, they had X amount of data. You know, of course, you understand how to build a vehicle, but then it's like when we're talking about full self-driving technology and whatnot, we have those things. I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory. But then there's this other thing where, say, for example, have you ever noticed that, say, for example, Tesla learns, for all the Tesla drivers out there, for folks who study Tesla, look at the things in which that Tesla does. For example, the system itself gets better as more people drive it, and it learns from that data, and it sends software updates over the air. So that way it's kind of like your car is like pretty much brand new. It's a brand new car after a software update. That's
just like an iPhone.
Just like an iPhone. So essentially it's like they learn from the data. So now they built X amount of models for the data. Then on top of that, they're receiving the analytical data in real time. And then that data gets sent back while, say, for example, the actual product is out there, moving along the streets. And we see this across full self-driving. Hence the reason why full self-driving continues to keep getting better and better and better. They're acquiring the data, then modeling the data, then running it through simulations. And then from that, they repackage it based upon what they learn, tweak some things, and then ship it right back out to the same vehicle that just fed them the data to literally create, say, for example, better solutions for, say, for example, Tesla drivers. And
so it's like being in multiple places at once because you're gathering all this information. So instead of Tesla like being in the vehicle with you and well, I guess they are kind of, but like, someone there, physical person being there, taking notes and all that, they're able to use AI to gather that data. And then from that data, then they improve their products.
That is correct. So Tesla creates a digital twin of every car it sells. Tesla then updates the software based upon individual vehicle sensor data, uploads updates to its products. The data-driven software development process enables more efficient resource allocation, and on top of that, a better user experience overall.
So basically, because I'm seeing all these questions in here, so just for the note takers out there, we talked about what the digital twin was. You all got that.
Yeah, I'm starting to see that people are starting to say, oh, I'm getting it now.
Yeah, a virtual replica.
A virtual replica of the actual thing. Then essentially it's like from that virtual replica, they're learning from the data.
Yes.
They're improving they're improving it via virtual, running it through test models and everything else. Once when they realize, okay, hey, we have enough sufficient data and enough sufficient, say for example, results from that virtual data, we move it from virtual back to physical product. And it's just a continuous process of running it through the digital twin.
Over and over and over again.
And that's the reason why, if you think about, like, for example, competition, that's the reason why they have upward competition over everybody else. So they say, Accenture says, unleash the power of data. To gain the organizational insights and greater agility that the mirrored world promises, you first need a strong and comprehensive data foundation for your twins. When intelligent twins are connected in mirror environments, they are a powerful way to turn data into actionable, big picture insights. But incomplete or incorrect data will lead to false conclusions. Interesting. I promise I won't be shady today. No shades that come on. I am trying my very hardest. I just want to see Lucid. I want to see Neo. I want to see all these other car manufacturers do that. And then once you are able to do that, I also want to see GM Cruise do that, but the shades now come off.
Okay.
I also want to see Waymo do that, though, that they've been around here. They out here having in these streets now, though that they're out here having in these streets without a CEO. All right, only 11% of executives estimate that 100% of the data provided through Internet of Things devices and or sensors in their organizations is fully utilized. Only 11%.
That's a small amount, y'all.
So it lets you know that essentially that they still got a long way to go. And it lets you know that honestly, that there's so much more opportunity and upside. And hence the reason why that, I believe alongside with Kathy and many of the other researchers out there in the world, that honestly, we are very much so in the early innings of this game. So if we were to put it into real perspective, since there's 9 innings in a baseball game, I would say that we're in inning number 2.
Oh, wow. Okay.
This game is just getting started.
So Mark, if we're looking at part 1, so we have stacks, we have the companies that are not only innovating, but they're using data efficiently and in real time to make updates and make things better. And now you're saying we're in inning number 2 of 9. With that information, what do you think? Let me pause for a moment. I'll get back to it.
Okay.
I want you to carry on, and then I'll ask it.
Okay. So we see this thing called synthetic data for product simulation. Now, what do some of these things look like? I mean, we see these happen all the time, right? For example, if we look at Mobileye or many of these other companies that have gone through simulations of data without the real worlds of data, I mean, that's kind of like the synthetic data for product simulation. When we look at it for, say, for example, like how is it that people put together, pipes for, say, for example, underground water tunnels and everything else, they use data simulations. And so essentially, that's the world in which that we're in now. I mean, we're using the digital twin to literally help extend. So let's look at it like this. So they say extend, a risk-free playground for innovation, which is 100% true. So it says that, for example, they are essentially a risk-free playground to explore new product ideas, strategize for many possible futures, and explore limitless what-if scenarios. So here's the thing to know about AI. AI is known for producing what-if scenarios. And then the machine, so I'm going to take you guys through a little bit more into AI. So I'm going to put you guys all in and make you guys think that, so let's talk about it.
All right.
If artificial intelligence produces what if scenarios, like where it's always talking about what if scenarios, then machine learning that's built on top of that artificial intelligence is producing recommendations of how to, say, for example, resolve or find solutions to those what if scenarios. And it's consistently learning as, say, for example, solutions are being provided, and it's learning from those outcomes to start being able to produce it on its own. And then sooner or later, it'll automatically be able to foresee these things coming along. And then from there, it's able to say, okay, hey, well, based upon machine learning, this is what I recommend, or this is what we should do. And how do we see that portray out? I'll give you guys the best thing, which is probably the technology that everybody can kind of like relate to since it's the hottest topic: autonomous driving. If we look at autonomous driving, AI produces a lot of the what if scenarios. Hence the reason why, if you think about it, why it's able to stop based upon seeing, for example, pedestrian walking on the side of the street and then automatically jump out. AI is already running simulation models in real time, consistently saying, what if this person jumps out into the street? What if something happens? Am I ready to ultimately make a complete stop? That's what the what if is doing. The machine learning is doing this. It's saying, okay, hey, if this happens, I recommend that we do this, or we need to do this, and automatically be prepared for it. So it can kind of like partly foresee exactly a few hash of a seconds better than the human brain to say, okay, hey, let me process this, and then boom, I already know what I must do.
So basically,
like for example, if it notices, like another thing that it does is I'm sorry, Jolene.
No, go ahead.
Another thing is if it notices traffic that's picking up, say for example, across somewhere else, machine learning will automatically kick in and say, hey, well, maybe we should reroute this navigation to go somewhere else, so that, or to go a different route, so that way we can get there either at the same time or faster.
So what I was gonna say is, it's easy to get to go, just to geek out on all this. But when you bring it back to your investments, all these things that we're talking about, these are the things that certain companies are implementing, that's making them the technology like leaders. They are the ones that will be the ones that are exploiting the data.
Yep.
And gathering it and using digital twins for their benefit to make the company or their product better. And also those that are that constantly invest in their technology stacks, those are the ones that are pie bakers. We talked about pie takers and pie bakers, those who create more and more value. So the way you can look at this, like if any of this is going over your head, the main things you need to know is you just need to know who is in the game, who is leading the way, because the ones that are leading the way, those are the pie bakers who you want to invest in. Those are the ones that are going to make your portfolio blow up. So if you're busy, looking at companies that are just pie takers, meaning that they just take a slice, they repackage it, or they're not innovating enough to now create more value to make more pies, so to speak, then when you're looking at your portfolio, if you're not invested in the pie bakers, then your portfolio is by default raggedy. And we already said no raggedy portfolios in 2021. So the way to look at this, y'all, is knowing this stuff is what's going to build your generational wealth. These are the companies and the technology that will benefit your children's children's children. So if that's not enough to get you motivated, I don't know what is.
Well, let's make the data human really quickly. So if we talk about digital twins, right?
Mm-hmm.
If we're talking about digital twins, and like, let's say that there's a virtual part of things, there's a virtual part of the world. And from that, it's like, it's built from the things in which that are physical. So it's an exact replica of the things in which that are physical. So that's the digital twin. So it's built from the actual things in which that ultimately is created a replica for, so that way it can run through simulation after simulation. So if you know that, think about this. We talked about autonomous driving. We already got that part. Now let's talk about other things, like, for example, health. Mm-hmm. Imagine how genetics is playing a role when we look at the CRISPR therapeutics, and let's look at quantum computing and the type of compute power in which it is able to run consistent simulation after simulation after simulation to be able to come up with, say, for example, finding vaccinations or cures for specific diseases. It takes in the information from actual self. So, for example, it takes in the data from actual real world scenarios of people, real world molecular biology, and then essentially bringing that over into virtual and then running that over multiple simulations to find the cure. And then that's where testing comes back in physical. That's digital twins working together symbiotically. If we look at, say, for example, how digital cities or smart cities are being produced, if you look at everything within the ARC Innovation ETF, let's look at it like that. Every single one of those companies has what is called a digital twin. If you look at every single company, like for example, Teladoc, digital twin, because ultimately it's building knowledge based upon, say, for example, the folks in whom which they call in and need to speak to a doctor. It's learning. If we look at, say, for example, what's happening with Tesla is like a no-brainer. If we look at CRISPR Therapeutics and what they're using, if we look at, say, for example, what they're using at, let's say, Roku, they also build digital twins. Why? Because they learn from they're able to learn from the data in the virtual world to be able to create even bigger and better user experiences for the technology that people will use to consume entertainment. And then boom, hence the reason why they got into the digital media ad space, the same space where Google is. Why? Because essentially they learned from the data and the data told them, hey, this is where essentially where we should be to improve. Digital twins do that, where you start to see where there's improvement or where the data is guiding them to literally build something, to acquire something, to improve, then that's where you're starting to see the digital twin at work. And it's kind of like, think about it like this. It's like your own individual artificial intelligence AI assistant, except like think about it like a digital sibling. I guess the best movie that I can kind of put it into perspective is like the movie Surrogates or iRobot. I know that kind of scares people, but hey. So, okay, so then let's look at it as it pertains to how does this affect your portfolio?
Yes.
So how does this affect your portfolio and moving forward? Now, of course, if you're looking at it over the next 6 months to a year, not really going to affect your portfolio that much unless they're starting to make the announcement that they're making these investments into this type of technology and using the data as their guide. Hence the reason why people are falling in love with Microsoft, because Microsoft is now building business services based upon the artificial intelligence or digital twins of what it's learning from its customer or user base. So that's the reason why you see Microsoft just doing so significantly well. Now, essentially, if we look over the next 2 to 3 years or the next 4 years, I mean, just imagine this. And I always say this, take a good look about where we were 5 years ago when it came to the technology. Now take a look at where we are today. Now ask yourself this, will we be the same that we are today from 2020? Will we be the same in 2026 that we are in 2021? It's not going to happen. So now you got to start identifying the companies out there that are willing to spend the money, that are going to make the acquisitions, that are ultimately going to be doing the innovation. So they're spending the money in research and development or acquisitions. Those are the companies in which that you're going to want to have your capital tied to, because when they come out, it's like more so in the sense of like Amazon. Amazon once upon a time, hey, we could turn the lights on anytime we want to. And the moment that they turn their lights on, essentially they never look back as it pertains to not being profitable. That's power right there. And that's what you're looking for in every one of the companies. I'll even give you another spoiler alert. And it's 7:05. Yeah, 7:05. Perfect timing. 7:05, April 13th. Now I've made 2 predictions. I'm going to make 2 predictions, which is rare in an episode. I guarantee you this. Whatever the companies that will be in the top 10 of ARC's ETF will probably be in the S&P 500 from now and from between 2021 and 2026. Book it. What they are building is they are investing in the next generation of companies that will replace legacy companies that no longer can perform that innovation or no longer in love or no longer in favor with the next generation of investor or, say, for example, just people. they will replace the S&P 500, which means that honestly, ARK could be an index fund in disguise, but yet at the same token, they're using innovation to ultimately guide them. And like we always say, or what they say, truth wins out and let the data speak. That's it.
That's how she wrote, y'all.
I know TiVo is going to go heavy in the timestamps because I said a lot. And I know that, some of you may have to go back and watch this episode multiple times. Or essentially just you'll remember some of the things that were said in today's episode. And I guarantee you this, I'm actually going to give you a third timestamp.
Oh, dang.
Before 2021 is over,
Mm-hmm.
you all will understand digital twins and some of the other data, because then you'll start to see those things start to play out in some of those companies before this year is out. I guarantee you will. That's a spoiler.
All right. 3. All right, y'all. We got to get out of here.
Jolene, did you know something though?
What?
How long ago did we start the Come Up series?
It hasn't been wait, is it a year? It's the anniversary.
Not yet.
I was about to say when. I don't have an exact date.
In 2 weeks.
2 weeks.
In 2 weeks.
Oh man.
Will be 1 year old.
Stunt campaign for the Come Up series. Okay.
So congratulations to each and every single one of you that were there with us from day one. We here.
Mark. That's our handshake, you guys.
Well, y'all, this has been real, but honestly, we got to go. But if you like what you saw, go ahead and hit the like button. And if you haven't subscribed yet, and if you want to get more information like this, then go ahead and hit the subscribe button down below. And if you want to be in the know for when we drop a new episode, but I have to make an announcement, Jolene.
Okay.
Come Thursday,
mm-hmm.
we're going to be going a little bit further into this data landscape.
Okay.
And instead, we're actually going to not even just a pioneer, but a disruptor and an innovator within quantum computing.
Ooh,
we're bringing a special guest all the way, I think, from Germany to the Come Up series to discuss quantum computing in the future.
Y'all are getting this good education. Let me tell you, this is good.
So, and then we may actually have to bring some cousins along for us for this one. This is going to be a pretty.
I have some in mind.
You do? Okay. Well, I will follow your lead on this one. I think that this is going to be super duper dope. So honestly, I'm excited because honestly, in order for folks to understand ARK and some of those investments that are taking place, you got to understand the industry and what the disruption that is taking place. So why not bring somebody from that disruptive part of the world in quantum computing to discuss it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because that's definitely something that the portfolios need for real.
All right.
Now
we got to get out of here.
We do.
All right, y'all. Well, until next time, I'm Mark Monroe.
And I'm Jolene GC in the place to be.
And this was your Come Up on Trade Talk Tuesday. And thank you for joining with us. And now this was Data Now Analyzed. We'll see you on Thursday. Have a good night. Stay safe. The more you learn, the more you earn. Peace, y'all.